In May 2017, Lena Marlowe, a 19-year-old University of Oregon student, vanished without a trace on a remote trail in the Sierra Nevada mountains. For 3 years, she was presumed dead, the victim of an accident or an attacker in the wilderness. But in April 2020, she walked into a small grocery store in the town of Bishop, California, alive but unrecognizable. What she told police when she was finally able to speak shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Where had she been for those 3 years? And what really happened to her? Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Late afternoon on May 14th at Donner Pass, California. The weather was cool and crisp, but daylight faded faster than usual as winds from the Sierra Nevada began sweeping down into the narrow valleys. At a small parking lot near the entrance to Coldstream Canyon, a spot where groups of trekkers and geology students often set out, activity continued steadily until late in the afternoon. At the center of that seemingly familiar scene was 19-year-old Lena Marlowe, a freshman environmental biology major at the University of Oregon. To her friends and professors, Lena was the careful type of student who always came fully prepared for field trips. And to her family, she was the daughter who always texted her itinerary before heading out. That day's survey was part of a series of assignments for her botany class, requiring students to independently collect samples from different ecological zones around Donner Pass, and Lena had chosen to head into Coldstream Canyon because it had several plant species she wanted to document. According to the parking lot attendant, who later provided information to police, Lena arrived around 3:30 p.m., wearing light trekking gear and carrying a notebook and paper map. She stood by her car for a few minutes to double-check her survey plan, then sent her mother a short text saying she'd be back before dark. The attendant said Lena headed onto the trail at about 3:42 p.m., walking briskly because the light was fading and she wanted to finish before nightfall. That was the last time she was seen in the Donner Pass area. Starting around 6 p.m., Lena's mother began calling to check if she was off the mountain yet, but got no answer. Subsequent calls went straight to voicemail. Lena's phone was no longer connecting. By 7:30 p.m., her parents were growing worried because such prolonged silence was completely out of character for someone as cautious as Lena, who always checked in when trekking alone. They tried calling several more times over the next hour, but nothing changed. When the clock hit 9:30 p.m. and Lena's phone still showed no response, the family realized this silence was beyond a normal delay. For someone who proactively reported even minor schedule changes, Lena's complete loss of contact quickly turned concern into action. Without hesitation, her father immediately called the Nevada County Sheriff's Office to report his daughter missing. The call was received at the sheriff's headquarters in Truckee at exactly 9:31 p.m., and within minutes, the duty officer activated the protocol for missing persons in mountainous terrain, contacting the unit responsible for the Donner Pass area to open a file and begin the initial assessment process for such cases. At that point, there were no extreme weather factors that would suggest an immediate emergency, but the clear anxiety in the family's account, especially Lena's strict adherence to check-in rules when trekking, prompted the duty officer to decide not to wait until morning. A patrol unit was dispatched to Coldstream Canyon to check the parking area where Lena was last seen. They confirmed her car was still parked exactly where the attendant described, normally locked, with no signs of collision or tampering, and no indication she had returned to it after leaving that afternoon. The sight of the car sitting motionless in the darkened lot, amid the silence and cold air drifting down from the Sierra Nevada, led the patrol to immediately report to command that this might not be a typical lost hiker case. Police asked the family to describe Lena's clothing, backpack, and planned itinerary, then mobilized the Forest Service's night search team. Rangers specializing in nighttime operations in Tahoe National Forest were deployed to establish the last known point, LKP, the final location, where the victim was seen or likely started from. Based on the parking lot witness, Lena's LKP was confirmed as the main trailhead into Coldstream Canyon at 3:42 p.m. A critical data point for setting the search direction along her probable route. After establishing the LKP, rangers used topographic maps, slope gradients, trail intersections, and high-risk areas to create the primary search area, covering the main trail axis where most trekkers would likely travel. This area was expanded in both directions, one deeper into the canyon, the other sweeping side trails branching off the main path. Around 11 p.m., the county's additional SR team was mobilized, bringing tracking dogs and high-powered lighting to scan stream banks, rocky slide areas, and shallow cliff edges near the trail. The goal that first night wasn't deep tracking, but detecting any suggestive signs, unusual lights, calls for help, fresh slide marks, or abnormal movement within the immediate LKP radius. Police simultaneously closed all access to Coldstream Canyon overnight to prevent civilians from entering, contaminating the scene, or endangering themselves. By nearly midnight, Lena's family arrived at the parking lot and was given a separate area a few meters from the temporary command post. Her mother kept trying to call Lena, even though the chance of a response was virtually zero. The deputy sheriff in charge explained the search process, emphasizing that disappearances late in the afternoon in mountain areas have two key time windows, the first 12 hours to determine if the victim is mobile or injured, and the first 24 hours to assess whether she remains within the main trail corridor. Based on when Lena was last seen, they assumed that if she had suffered physical issues, become disoriented, or been affected by environmental factors, she likely hadn't gone far from her starting area. Thus, the primary search area was repeatedly swept through the night, while the secondary search area, steep terrain, dense forest, and rarely used side paths, was scheduled for first light when natural visibility would help. All first-night operations were conducted cautiously but urgently, with the sole aim of finding the first clue to Lena's direction of travel. However, by 2 a.m., no signals had been detected, no sounds, no lights, no fresh tracks on the ground, and no cell data indicating the victim had left the Donner Pass area after losing contact. The search team noted this as a no-indicator case, meaning every scenario, getting lost, injury, hypothermia-induced collapse, remained equally possible in the initial assessment. The family was advised to return to a temporary hotel near Truckee to avoid exhaustion, while rescue personnel continued operations until dawn. No one on the team anticipated that the lack of any sign of Lena on the first night would lead to a long series of days filled with unanswered questions. As dawn broke over Donner Pass, the field command shifted from emergency nighttime mode to formal search operations, adding equipment and expanding personnel. Weather conditions on the morning of May 15th were fairly stable, with strong enough light for rangers and SAR teams to reevaluate the area around the starting point. But forecasts warned of a possible late snow in the afternoon, forcing the teams to maximize the morning window. Long-range drones were deployed early to scan narrow valleys and hard-to-reach terrain around Coldstream Canyon. Infrared cameras with wide-angle views helped spot objects contrasting with the forest background. Around 9 a.m., a drone flying at medium altitude spotted an object of unusual color near a broad rock outcrop about 300 meters as the crow flies from the main trail. Images sent back to command showed the object resembling a backpack, standing upright and not covered by dirt, rocks, or branches. Something that stood out because if it had been blown by wind or fallen from height, it wouldn't be balanced like that. A ranger team was sent on foot to the location, taking about 40 minutes to reach it due to steep and brushy terrain. Upon arrival, they confirmed it was a lightweight day pack of the type Lena typically used for surveys. However, the pack showed no signs of being dragged or heavily impacted. Straps were intact, outer pockets clean, and its placement wasn't along any natural fall line. This discovery was immediately reported to command as a significant clue, while raising the first question in the file: why was the backpack off the main trail and in such pristine condition, as if placed rather than dropped? While one team continued sweeping around the backpack, Another traced northeast along a narrow strip of land where terrain suggested possible off-trail movement. There, around 11 a.m., they found a single women's trekking shoe lying alone near a thick clump of grass. It was a grippy-soled hiking shoe in a small size, matching the family's description of Lena's gear. What caught the rangers' attention most was that the sole was almost clean, no mud, wet soil, or fresh wear, while the surrounding area had soft mud from overnight dew. If the shoe had come off during movement or fallen, the sole would typically show impact marks or dirt adhesion, but here there were none. Additionally, the shoe was far too distant from the main trail for a normal accidental deviation without leaving footprints. Rangers marked the spot and fanned out in a wedge pattern to look for the mate, but found nothing within a 200-meter radius. By early afternoon, while one group expanded along a side trail, another reviewed topographic maps and sent a drone farther southwest. A second drone spotted a reflective object beneath a large tree. When the team reached it, they identified it as a handheld GPS unit commonly used by students on field surveys. Upon checking, rangers found the device powered off, yet with nearly half battery remaining. It hadn't shut down due to low power or malfunction. The power button had been manually pressed. This detail prompted command to note a clear anomaly, since field protocol required students to keep GPS units running throughout surveys for route documentation. Around 1 p.m., another item was found near a shallow rock crevice, a small field research camera, exterior undamaged, but with an empty memory card slot. Rangers thoroughly searched the vicinity, but found no card nearby. The camera showed no damage, no strong impact marks, and no water exposure, indicating it hadn't fallen into water or from height. If it had slipped from the pack or dropped during movement, the casing would likely show scratches or cracks, but there were none. These successive discoveries, an intact backpack, clean shoe, manually powered off GPS, camera missing its memory card, began painting a picture where Lena's disappearance didn't fit the typical lost hiker pattern. However, without direct evidence of foul play, command continued the search under the missing person framework. By early afternoon, snow began falling lightly as forecasted. Late May snow at Donner Pass wasn't heavy, but enough to obscure tracks and make footprint analysis nearly impossible. Search teams had to narrow their focus while intensifying checks of high-risk spots like cliff edges, drainages, and deep crevices. Snow intensified late in the afternoon, forcing SAR to pull personnel from steep areas to avoid rockfall risks. By 5 p.m., after nearly 20 continuous hours of searching since the initial report, the field commander filed a temporary report stating, "No signs of collision, injury, or struggle found. Victims' items discovered in conditions inconsistent with natural accident or disorientation models." That report was sent to the Truckee Sheriff's Office, and Lena's case was officially reclassified as missing under unusual circumstances, a significant shift in approach that explains why investigators began emphasizing factors beyond simple getting lost or accidental injury. Nearly 3 years after the day Lena Marlowe disappeared at Donner Pass, the case had gradually moved down the list of unsolved missing persons files in Nevada County, though her family continued to check in periodically and the police maintained the status of missing under suspicious circumstances in the system. However, on an early April morning, the town of Bishop, California, located more than 150 miles south of Donner Pass, suddenly received a report from a local resident about a young woman, exhausted-looking and unable to be identified, who appeared at the door of a small grocery store on the main street. The store owner said the woman arrived around 6:20 a.m., barefoot, with dirty clothes as if she had been wandering for days, disheveled hair, and a body trembling in the early morning cold. What struck him most was her terrified expression, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if avoiding something, while being unable to answer basic questions about her name or where she lived. Recognizing her unstable condition, the owner called the Bishop Police Department to request medical assistance and identity verification. When 2 officers arrived at the scene, they tried to question the woman again, but only received fragmented responses or disoriented shakes of the head. She carried no wallet, identification, or any personal items. When asked if she needed help, she only repeated that she didn't know and appeared visibly frightened at the sound of sirens outside. The police decided to transport her to Northern Inyo Healthcare District for a physical evaluation before proceeding with standard identity verification steps. At the hospital, doctors noted signs of exhaustion, mild dehydration, and severe disorientation, but no acute injuries. While awaiting basic test results, Bishop Police began taking fingerprints for database checks, as this was the only way to verify identity when the victim could not provide information herself. The fingerprints were submitted to the national system, and just minutes later, the results came back surprising the entire shift. They matched the record of Lena Marlowe, reported missing at Donner Pass nearly 3 years earlier. The system confirmed the match at an absolute level, indicating no error or discrepancy in the comparison. When this information reached the Bishop Police Department commander, they immediately contacted the Nevada County Sheriff's Office, where Lena's missing persons file was held, to confirm the case's latest status. Nevada County verified that Lena was still considered missing under suspicious circumstances and that there had been no indication she had left the Donner Pass area since 2017. The call between the two law enforcement agencies lasted only a few minutes, ending with a formal request from Nevada County for Bishop to temporarily detain the victim under medical supervision and not release information until direct identity confirmation was completed. A team of officers was assigned to the hospital to monitor and document Lena's condition while awaiting representatives from Nevada County to arrive in Bishop and take over the case. The news that a long-term missing person had suddenly reappeared in an unclear state prompted the involved agencies to quickly shift the file from missing person to special investigation event. At this point, the case was no longer viewed as a simple lost hiker or wilderness survival scenario, but as one requiring assessment for criminal elements, because Lena's reappearance in a state of cognitive impairment, without personal belongings, and hundreds of kilometers from her disappearance site, raised questions that standard search protocols could not explain. When the Bishop Police completed the identity verification report and sent official notification to Nevada County, Lena Marlowe's file status was updated in the system to open criminal investigation, victim located, marking a significant turning point. From the moment the missing person was found in an inexplicable condition, the entire case was treated as potentially involving criminal activity, triggering a new investigative process. At the hospital, Lena remained unable to answer questions about her current residence, how she arrived in Bishop, or what had happened during her 3 years of disappearance. Each time officers tried to ask anything related to the time she left Donner Pass, she either fell silent or appeared confused. However, on paper, the fingerprint identification was sufficient to conclude that the long-missing victim had reappeared, and this event immediately altered the scope and nature of the entire case. The Truckee Sheriff's Dispatch Unit was notified urgently, and Lena's family was contacted that same morning to confirm the information. The fact that a young woman missing in a remote mountain area had suddenly turned up unable to recall her name or explain the 3-year void in her life made the entire investigative team realize that the case had now gone far beyond an ordinary missing persons matter. When the fingerprint confirmation was relayed to the family, Lena's parents and brother immediately left Oregon for Bishop, caught between hope and fear that they might find their daughter in a state where she was no longer herself. The overnight flight and drive from the airport to Bishop left the family nearly exhausted, but no one wanted to stop along the way because they had been waiting for this reunion for nearly 3 years. At Northern Inyo Healthcare District, Bishop Police arranged a private room for the family to enter for recognition to avoid causing panic in the victim, who was clearly in a state of severe cognitive disturbance. When the door opened, Lena's mother nearly collapsed upon seeing the young woman curled up in the corner of the bed, hands clutching the white sheet tightly, eyes wearily staring at a fixed point on the wall. Lena looked much thinner than when she disappeared, her once long hair now cut short, tangled and dry, as if uncared for over a long period. Cheeks sunken, skin pale and gray from lack of sun. Lena's father softly called her name, his voice breaking on the first syllable, but Lena did not respond. Not because she hadn't heard, but because her eyes showed no recognition. She glanced briefly at her mother's face, as if looking at a stranger, with no emotion, no familiar reflex. When her mother stepped closer and reached out to touch her shoulder, Lena jerked sharply, recoiled, and pressed herself against the headboard, as if touched by something painful, her mouth emitting panicked gasps. This scene stunned the family, and the attending doctor immediately asked them to step back a few paces so Lena would not feel pressured. After a few minutes, the doctor explained that Lena's reaction was not rejection of her family, but a typical manifestation of severe cognitive impairment following prolonged disappearance. According to the initial medical report, she could not provide her name, age, address, had no sense of time, and was highly disoriented in space. When asked basic questions like, "Do you know where you are?" or "Do you remember who you were with?" she only shook her head or stared into the distance, sometimes repeating a meaningless or unrelated word. The doctor explained that the most concerning aspect was not the silence, but the fear response triggered by words, evoking places, times, or journeys. Lena reacted strongly to sudden noises, avoided eye contact, and often lowered her head or covered her face when someone approached too closely. When the family tried to speak to her, Lena responded with repetitive purposeless actions, such as continuously folding her fingers, pulling at her shirt hem, or twisting her wrist, as if trying to self-soothe with a habit formed over a long period. This made her parents realize they could not approach Lena in a normal way, and had to temporarily accept that reuniting with their daughter would not bring the easy emotional connection they had imagined during 3 years of waiting. Bishop Police continued to request family confirmation of identity through distinguishing features: a small scar on the left knee, a mole behind the right ear, and a distinctive eyelid crease, all matched. Lena's parents signed the official recognition document, and her file was immediately updated to long-term missing victim, located, identity, authenticated. Following this procedure, the doctor recommended transferring Lena from temporary treatment to a specialized monitored area for patients with cognitive impairment or post-trauma disorders to ensure her safety and support ongoing observation. This area was designed to minimize fear triggers, soft lighting, low noise, and continuous staff presence. The family was informed that Lena needed care in a stable environment, avoiding persistent questioning or attempts to force recollection, as it could cause further psychological harm. While Lena was moved to the new room, her mother persistently followed behind, still hoping that even for a moment, her daughter might turn around or recognize her voice. But Lena maintained her distant demeanor and showed no sign of familiarity. The two officers standing outside the door explained that this was very common in cases where victims are found after long periods of absence, especially when showing signs of psychological exhaustion. The family was allowed to visit Lena again during limited hours under medical staff supervision. Seeing their daughter sitting silently in the corner, face expressionless, Lena's mother felt both pain and relief that they had finally found her, but pain because it felt as though the person before them was only Lena's physical shell, while her memories, laughter, and vibrancy had been left somewhere none of them could reach. The first reunion ended in silence, the family leaving the room with a feeling of emptiness and fear about what had caused Lena to become this way. However, the identification procedure was complete, and from the moment Lena was officially confirmed, authorities were required to view the entire case as a victim located, but in an abnormal condition, necessitating monitored care and activation of subsequent investigative steps within their jurisdiction. After Lena was transferred to the special monitoring area at Northern Inyo Healthcare District, the responsible medical team began compiling a comprehensive medical record to assess her physical condition, and this phase provided the first data indicating that her 3 missing years could not be explained by any natural survival scenario. The general examination revealed clear signs of malnutrition, with significantly lower weight compared to her medical records from 3 years earlier, when she was still attending the University of Oregon. BMI indicators showed she had experienced prolonged energy deficiency, with muscle atrophy characteristic of cyclical malnutrition, meaning periods of very limited food intake, but not to the point of starvation, a pattern of minimal sustenance often seen in cases of captivity. Blood analysis showed vitamin D levels near rock bottom, so low as to be inconsistent with someone living in a natural light environment. Such severe deficiency only occurs when the body is deprived of sunlight exposure for extended periods. This led the medical team to note the likelihood that Lena had lived in an enclosed space with no access to natural light for at least many consecutive months. Her skin also reflected this pale, slightly gray tone, with no areas of tanning, typical of individuals restricted from outdoor exposure. Additionally, bone X-rays showed reduced bone density compared to the average for a healthy young woman, which typically occurs only with prolonged lack of movement and severe vitamin D deficiency, leading to reduced calcium absorption. More notably, musculoskeletal examination revealed Lena's legs had significantly weaker muscle tissue than expected. Doctors noted that her degree of mobility impairment was consistent with someone who had not walked regularly for a long time, possibly confined or fixed in a small space where movement was limited to a few steps. This was not a phenomenon occurring after a few weeks of being lost or enduring natural conditions, but the characteristic consequence of long-term restricted movement, commonly seen in victims held in fixed rooms or small areas. Upon examining wrists and ankles, doctors discovered faint but persistent marks, not fresh wounds, but remnants of previous restraint that had healed yet left darker lines around the skin. These marks were not from accidents or everyday objects, but were symmetrical and located exactly where binding or cuff marks typically appear when used long enough to create permanent indentations. The medical team recorded that these traces could not result from ordinary injuries or accidental self-infliction. They showed characteristics of steady, repeated pressure over periods ranging from weeks to months, depending on tightness. Along with this, the neurologist noted slowed reflexes, unsteady posture, and leg weakness severe enough to prevent maintaining balance for long, indicating Lena's body had adapted to minimal standing or walking. This data aligned with muscle tissue analysis showing prolonged nutrient depletion in the legs and hips, consistent with someone restricted in a confined environment. Furthermore, detailed examination revealed numerous small abrasions on Lena's skin, long-healed shallow cuts, and uneven darkened patches, signs that could appear from skin contact with rough or unpolished surfaces, characteristic of cramped, damp, and unclean areas. Some patches of dry and mildly inflamed skin on forearms and calves also indicated an environment lacking stable humidity or clean air, common in poorly ventilated spaces. Hair and nail examination provided critical data. Lena's hair was brittle, easily broken, severely dry, and her nails showed horizontal ridges characteristic of periodic malnutrition, indicating the body had undergone multiple cycles of biological stress. The nutrition specialist noted a pattern of prolonged nutrient deficiency, alternating with minimal sustenance, sufficient for survival, a common profile in cases where food intake is controlled. All these indicators together formed a unified medical picture. Lena had not spent 3 years surviving in the wilderness, had not been lost, had not fended for herself in natural conditions, but was the victim of confinement in an enclosed, light-deprived, movement-restricted, and controlled nutrition environment. The medical team compiled the results and recorded in the file that medical data consistent with long-term captivity pattern, a conclusion based solely on clinical analysis of injuries and bodily signs, not intended as a criminal hypothesis. This marked the first step in the official report. Lena Marlowe had undergone a period of severe environmental restriction, unable to choose her own nutrition, unable to move normally, and deprived of natural light for an extended time, indicating she was a victim of prolonged captivity before being found in Bishop. Immediately after completing the physical evaluation phase, Lena was transferred to the hospital's in-depth psychological assessment program, where psychiatrists and trauma specialists collaborated to build a profile evaluating her cognitive state. From the very first session, the team noted a series of clear signs indicating that Lena was experiencing dissociative amnesia, a disorder commonly seen in victims who have suffered severe trauma or prolonged captivity. When asked basic questions such as her name, age, place of residence, or family information, Lena sometimes remained completely silent, sometimes repeated the question instead of answering, and at other times gave unrelated responses, suggesting that most of her voluntarily accessible memories were detached and could not be retrieved in a normal way. Notably, Lena had not only forgotten events related to the 3 years she was missing, but she was also unable to accurately recall foundational information that a normal person could answer instinctively. Whenever the doctor tried to prompt memories of everyday life, Lena displayed signs of distress, avoiding eye contact, curling her body inward, rapid breathing, and sometimes covering her ears as if to block out all stimuli. This is a typical response of conditioned avoidance, formed when a victim has become accustomed to suppressing any information that could be dangerous in a captivity environment. Any cue that reminded Lena of having to recall something or provide an answer could become a trigger for fear. During behavioral observation sessions, doctors also noticed that Lena exhibited a startle reflex whenever someone approached within 2 steps, regardless of whether they moved gently or intended to apply pressure. She tended to sidestep, minimize her body space, and lower her head as a defensive reaction. This reflex was especially pronounced when someone stood behind her or when the room door made a sudden opening or closing sound, causing her to jolt and immediately seek a position against the wall to curl up. This is a conditioned fear response, commonly seen in victims who have experienced controlled living space or constant surveillance in a restricted freedom environment. Alongside this, Lena also displayed repetitive unconscious behaviors such as pulling at her fingertips, rotating her wrists in small circles, or lightly rubbing her palms together, all self-soothing behaviors typically seen in cases of prolonged stress. When asked about these behaviors, Lena could not explain their reason, indicating that they had formed during the period when she was deprived of control and had now become the body's default response to anxiety triggers. Another recorded manifestation was emotional instability. Lena could maintain a blank expression for long periods, but a strange sound, quick movement, or question referencing time would immediately shift her into extreme tension or even panic. In one assessment session, when the doctor inadvertently mentioned the phrase "going outside," Lena immediately clutched her head, pressed her back against the wall, and muttered incoherent, fragmented words. This reaction indicated that words related to leaving an enclosed space could evoke threatening experiences, consistent with the psychological pattern of someone who has been restricted in their living environment for an extended period and developed fear toward elements associated with freedom of movement. Multiple times during the examinations, Lena also showed temporary disconnection from the present. She could stop responding entirely for several tens of seconds, eyes open, but without a clear focal point, body motionless, unresponsive to sounds, as if sinking into a brief dissociative state. The specialist team referred to this as lapsed dissociation, a state in which the victim temporarily detaches from the surrounding environment to avoid confronting fear-inducing stimuli. Additionally, Lena's facial recognition ability showed abnormalities. She did not recognize her parents even when they stood in front of her, and when shown photos of herself before the disappearance, she merely looked and shook her head. The loss of connection between her current self and past identity is one of the clearest characteristics of post-trauma dissociative disorder. Beyond memory fragmentation, Lena also exhibited hypervigilance toward her environment. She continuously scanned the room corners, doors, and light gaps under the door, as if monitoring for the emergence of some threat. When the doctor asked why she behaved this way, Lena simply replied, "To be sure," a short answer that revealed her body had learned to respond in a pattern of heightened alertness over a long period. Synthesizing all observations, the expert team concluded that Lena displayed the full typical signs of a victim of prolonged captivity: dissociative amnesia, avoidance reflexes toward proximity, conditioned fear, unconscious self-soothing behaviors, excessive environmental monitoring, and panic when facing reminder cues. These manifestations were not the result of getting lost or surviving in natural conditions, but rather characteristic signs of someone placed in a controlled environment where every action and reaction had to adapt to the risk of punishment or surveillance. The official conclusion of the psychological profile clearly stated that Lena was in a state of complex trauma and widespread dissociative amnesia, consistent with a victim who had been restricted in freedom and subjected to prolonged continuous psychological pressure. In the initial days of Lena's treatment in the Special Monitoring Unit, the psychological specialists began attempting to collect the fragmented memories she might still retain, not to extract event details, but to identify spatial elements that could aid the investigation's direction. With all sensitive questions, Lena could not provide complete answers, but her body and reactions inadvertently revealed many important points. When the doctor asked her to describe the last place she remembered living, Lena lowered her head and clasped her hands together, but this time, after several minutes of prolonged silence, she blurted out a short phrase, "Tight, very tight." From there, the specialist team began building open-ended question chains, focused on sensations rather than events. Lena could not describe width or length, but she could confirm that the space she had been in was too small to stand upright comfortably, and whenever she tried to step toward the wall, her elbows often touched a cold, rough surface like concrete or stone. When asked where the light in that space came from, Lena could not specify the source, but mentioned yellow light and suggested that the light did not change with the time of day. From the keyword "constant light" onward, the specialists understood that the space she had lived in had no windows or any form of natural light. Whenever the doctor mentioned the sun, morning, or sky, Lena immediately showed signs of curling up, indicating she had become accustomed to an environment without a clear day-night concept. Memories of sounds in that space also emerged fragmentedly but consistently. When asked about sounds she heard regularly, Lena mentioned steady humming, noisy but low, or never turns off. The specialists linked this description to the sound of a small generator or an engine-powered device placed nearby. Whenever the doctor suggested hypotheses related to fan noise or ventilation systems, Lena did not respond, but when asked if that sound ever stopped at night, she shook her head vigorously, as if completely denying it. This helped confirm that the generator or similar device operated continuously and might be the sole power source in the place she was held. When exploring the space's structure, the doctor asked Lena to draw or describe the location of the entrance door, but she could not complete any shape. However, she mentioned a small door, then corrected it to a sliding panel, and performed a hand motion as if pulling a tray upward from below or pushing it out from the wall. The specialists inferred that this was the image of a food delivery slot system, a small sliding door commonly found in cells or isolation rooms, where the person delivering food does not have to face the occupant directly. The way Lena mimicked opening the sliding slot, moving her wrist horizontally, then quickly pulling her hand back as if reflexively avoiding, indicated she was accustomed to receiving food through a small opening without seeing the deliverer. When asked if she could see the person outside, Lena did not answer immediately, but after a very long pause, she said no, only footsteps. This was the first time she hinted at the presence of another person. When asked further about those footsteps, Lena described the sound as heavy, slow, and very deliberate, as if the person always stood near the door before making noise. When the doctor asked if that person ever spoke to her, Lena gently shook her head, but then added an almost unconscious phrase, voice low. This was the first clue related to the individual who appeared in her captivity environment. A deep male voice, speaking little, never showing his face, and interacting only indirectly through footsteps or sounds outside the door. And although Lena could not describe a face or build, whenever the doctor asked questions related to the man or the other person, she immediately curled up, raising her hands to cover her neck and shoulders. A strong defensive reflex, indicating that memories of that person were tied to profound fear. Another fragmented but important memory emerged when the doctor asked if she had ever left that space. At first, Lena denied it, but after several sessions, she unexpectedly said in a broken sentence, "Outside, night, very dark." This was the first time she acknowledged moments when she was taken out of the captivity location. The doctor asked where she went, but Lena shook her head, seemingly unable or unwilling to recall. Notably, the word night appeared repeatedly when she tried to express it. This indicated that every time she was taken outside occurred in darkness, possibly near midnight or very early, when there was no light, or to avoid being seen by others. In one therapy session, when the doctor asked how it felt to be taken outside, Lena only said, "Cold, couldn't see anything very quick," then immediately fell into a tense state. This suggested that time outside was brief, not for granting freedom, but possibly only for relocation or performing some repetitive activity. All the fragmented memories that Lena unconsciously provided, though not forming a clear sequence of events, were unified on one point: she had been in a cramped, enclosed space with no natural light, continuous generator noise, a sliding food slot, and the presence of a man who never revealed his face, appearing only indirectly through sounds. These were not memories of someone surviving being lost in nature, but rather characteristic descriptions of a controlled artificial captivity environment. They reinforced the assessment that Lena did not simply disappear from Donner Pass, but was taken to another location, held there in complete isolation, and these fragmented memories were the first pieces toward better understanding the place where she had been imprisoned for many years. When the psychological specialists completed the initial phase of evaluating Lena's cognitive state, the environmental forensics team was mobilized to analyze samples collected from her body, hair, clothing, and fingernails. Elements that often retain microscopic traces that a victim cannot remove themselves, especially when confined in an enclosed space or area with unique geological characteristics. This analysis process was considered a critical step in narrowing down the geographical environment where Lena may have been held, as the microscopic samples retained in pores, fabric folds, and nail crevices would reflect the actual conditions of the place she lived in for an extended period. The team began by analyzing pollen adhered to Lena's hair and clothing. Although she was found in Bishop, an area with a distinct high desert flora, a portion of the pollen in the samples belonged to species found only at elevations of 2,200, 2,600 meters in the Sierra Nevada. Among the collected samples was pollen from the Pinus jeffreyi species, which grows densely on the northern slopes near Donner Summit, along with a small amount of pollen from Artemisia tridentata in high elevation areas. Notably, the pollen was not randomly distributed, but followed a concentrated pattern, indicating that Lena had lived for an extended time in a fixed environment at that elevation rather than brief exposure while traveling. The degree of pollen degradation also showed that it was not recently adhered in the past few days, but had been retained on the body for a long period, possibly months, due to stable humidity and an enclosed space, where pollen was not dispersed by wind or body movement. The pollen analysis effectively ruled out nearly all possibility that Lena had been in lower elevation areas such as the Bishop region, Owens Valley, or any towns in the southern desert, as the pollen composition there is entirely different. From this, the probable environmental range was narrowed to high mountain areas of the Sierra Nevada range, particularly the pine forest belt along the northern Rocky slopes. Next, the forensics team focused on analyzing soil samples taken from Lena's fingernails, inner clothing folds, and the soles of her feet. Mineral analysis results revealed the presence of hematite and magnetite, two minerals commonly found in old iron mining areas scattered throughout the Sierra Nevada, but rare in the Bishop area or surrounding lowlands. Additionally, the soil samples contained a characteristic deep red mineral dust, typical of abandoned mining tunnels, where soil has been compacted over decades and contains metal oxides left by old mining equipment. A particular point was the high density of ultrafine particle sizes, which only occurs in enclosed spaces where wind cannot disperse rock dust, causing it to accumulate over time and adhere to the body of someone living nearby. This suggested that Lena had not only been near an old mine, but may have lived in or near a tunnel or enclosed mining-related structure for an extended period. In addition to pollen and soil, forensics also recovered tiny wood fibers stuck to Lena's sleeve cuffs and the back shoulder area of her clothing. Analysis of wood cell structure and grain patterns showed these were rough-hand-cut Jeffrey pine, not industrially processed lumber. Some fibers bore marks of being sawn with a handsaw or small chainsaw rather than industrial machinery, and had dried resin edges, indicating the wood was harvested or worked on a small scale, possibly used to build a cabin or simple bed frame. Notably, these wood fibers showed slight rot, indicating they had been in an environment with low but not completely dry humidity, consistent with a hand-built cabin in a high mountain area where low temperatures but enclosed space humidity could retain moisture. When combining the high-elevation pollen, mine-characteristic minerals, and signs from rough wood fibers, forensics completely excluded the possibility that Lena had been in a modern living condition or urban area. There were no traces of synthetic materials, no modern concrete dust, no household chemicals, and no signs of urban soil in the clothing or body samples. All microscopic components pointed to a wild or semi-wild environment, particularly areas where hand-built cabins had been constructed or where mining activity once occurred. For verification, forensics compared these mineral compositions with the USGS geological database. The results showed near-perfect matches with abandoned iron mines in the northern Sierra Nevada, particularly the scattered mining strips around Mono County and the mountain ranges east of Truckee. These areas have a mining history from the early 20th century, abandoned for decades with no current activity, but still retaining tunnel systems, ventilation shafts, and small bunkers hidden in the forest. The specialists assessed that the level of mine dust in Lena's fingernails was so high that it could only have been acquired by living in or near an enclosed mineral area, not from a single passing visit. Combining all analysis results, high-elevation pollen, characteristic abandoned mine minerals, hand-built cabin wood fibers, the environmental picture was clearly outlined. Lena had been in an area of the Sierra Nevada range at elevations above 2,200 meters, near or inside a structure related to an old mine or artificially built bunker in the pine forest region. This conclusion was recorded in the official forensics report as a scientific assessment. Environmental trace evidence indicates prolonged habitation in or near abandoned mining structures within the Sierra Nevada range. This was not a speculative prediction, but a conclusion based on microscopic material components matching the specific environment found only in abandoned mines in the high mountain areas of the Sierra Nevada. After the environmental forensic report was completed and indicated that Lena had most likely lived in or near an abandoned mining structure in the Sierra Nevada, the interagency investigation team consisting of the FBI, the Nevada County Sheriff's Office, and representatives from the Forest Service immediately convened a strategic meeting to plan a large-scale field survey. Microscopic clues recovered from Lena's body and clothing, high-altitude pollen, minerals characteristic of old iron mines, dust from enclosed shafts, and wood fibers from a hand-cut cabin, allowed the search area to be narrowed to mining sites that had operated in the previous century and were now abandoned, scattered across the mountain ranges north and east of Donner Pass. These areas were vast and dangerous, with steep terrain, dense pine forest, partially collapsed tunnels, and entrances obscured by time, requiring coordination between national and local forces to ensure safety and accuracy in the survey. The investigation team began by analyzing USGS geological maps, identifying iron and mineral mines that had been heavily active at elevations above 7,200 feet. From this data, they pinpointed more than 20 sites with tunnel systems or auxiliary structures, but not all matched the mineral dust pattern found on Lena. Forest Service mineral experts eliminated mines with high quartz or clay content that did not match the soil samples, narrowing it down to 7 areas with suitable structures, and of these, only 3 fully met the forensic criteria: appropriate elevation, history of iron-related activity, and the potential for large enclosed spaces capable of holding a person. These 3 areas included a small cluster of mines near Carpenter Ridge, an abandoned tunnel system on the eastern slope of Granite Peak, and an old bunker near the summit of Lost Horse Ridge, which had once served as a shelter during the mining era, but was no longer clearly marked on modern tourist maps. To assess the feasibility of each location, the FBI coordinated with the local sheriff to take statements from scattered residents in the area and hunters who frequently entered the mountains. Several hunters, who had been active for years in the forest north of Truckee, reported seeing faint lights or hearing strange noises from remote areas in recent winters, but attributed them to illegal campers or survivalist groups. An elderly man living on the edge of Mono County said he had seen a figure moving near Carpenter Ridge at night 2 years earlier, but could not identify the person or their direction. Another hunter reported hearing small explosions, like a generator starting up a few times, but the sound stopped quickly and did not recur immediately, leading him to think it was just an echo from the valley. Although these statements did not constitute direct evidence, they strangely aligned with Lena's description of a never-ending sound and dim yellow light. From this, the investigation team developed a reasonable hypothesis that one of these long-forgotten forest sites may have been repurposed by someone as a shelter or to conceal illegal activity. In parallel with gathering statements, field survey teams were dispatched to the 3 suspect areas to evaluate access routes, safety levels, and the likelihood of underground enclosed spaces. Carpenter Ridge was deemed the most accessible, with several side trails and some tunnels still partially open, but the dense forest would require extensive time to search. Granite Peak was more dangerous due to numerous sinkholes and sheer cliffs. Lost Horse Ridge was the most difficult to reach, with rugged terrain and little human traffic, making any lights or strange noises very hard to detect from afar. The investigation team decided to conduct surveys in a priority order, combining feasibility and forensic environmental value. The old bunker at Lost Horse Ridge received special attention because its elevation matched the pollen samples and the iron dust in the soil aligned with the mining history of the area. However, the bunker entrance was believed to be partially buried after decades, requiring specialized equipment and a rescue team for access. The FBI and Truckee Sheriff established a 3-phase inspection plan. The first phase involved ground and drone approach to check surface structures. The second used thermal sensors and ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the surface. The final phase was direct internal survey if signs of a hatch or concealed structure were found. For safety, each area would be divided into a search grid with medical support teams on standby in case of sinkholes or unstable tunnels. Deployment had to proceed cautiously due to the high risk of collapse or loss of scene integrity if access was uncontrolled. The survey teams prepared equipment in the late afternoon, while the analysis group mapped access routes for each site based on actual terrain and daylight limitations. Once the inspection plan was finalized and personnel assignments approved, the investigation team prepared to enter a critical phase, returning to the Sierra Nevada with the goal of precisely identifying the place where Lena had been held during her 3 years of disappearance. After the investigation team completed the planning phase for surveying the 3 suspect areas, Lost Horse Ridge was selected as the first target due to its highest match with forensic data on pollen, minerals, and environmental traces. On the morning of deployment, the interagency group, including the FBI, Nevada County Sheriff, Forest Service Rangers, and a specialized geological technical team, gathered at the northern base of Lost Horse Ridge, equipped with ground-penetrating radar, long-range drones, terrain positioning systems, and tools for steep terrain access. The area featured dense pine forest, trails that were barely discernible due to infrequent visitors, and sheer rock faces that made movement slow and required constant safety alerts. From the initial steps, The survey group noted the rugged terrain, with soil mixed with reddish-brown mineral dust, matching the samples clinging to Lena's fingernails. The drone team was deployed first to scout from above, looking for anomalies on the ground that the naked eye might miss, such as old ruts, disturbed soil patches, or geometric shapes, suggesting concealed man-made structures. After scanning the mountainside for over 40 minutes, the drone identified an area with uneven vegetation distribution, a roughly 3-square-meter circular patch of ground that was grayer and noticeably less moss-covered than the surrounding area. This anomaly led the investigation team to suspect it could be a site affected by human activity, such as a concealed entrance or previously excavated area. When the ground survey team approached the spot, they found the surface was not as flat as expected, but had slight subsidence, as if it had been unnaturally compacted. The technical team brought in ground-penetrating radar and began scanning the entire area. Within minutes, the screen displayed a void at a depth of about 2.5 meters, shaped like an elongated corridor, adjacent to a larger void, suggesting a room or storage chamber. The outlines indicated this was not a natural sinkhole, but a man-made structure, built or dug in a linear fashion. This perfectly matched the hypothesis of a bunker or old mine auxiliary facility. The survey team began probing the surface with rods to test stability. Several probes registered hollowness below, indicating uneven void depth and potential danger if stepping in the wrong spot. While maintaining a safe distance, a ranger closely examined the surface and spotted a crucial detail. Beneath the layer of pine needles and rock dust, there was a faint square outline, resembling the edge of a metal hatch covered by time. Gently brushing away the topsoil with a small broom revealed the metal edge more clearly, confirming this was once a hatch, now camouflaged with dirt, rocks, and dry leaves to avoid detection. This discovery was immediately reported to command, and the team initiated safe access procedures. They used specialized tools to remove thin layers of soil from the surface, avoiding collapse or shifting of the underlying structure. Gradually, a thick hinged metal door emerged, covered in dry moss and accumulated forest debris over the years. The bolts securing the door were rusted but intact, suggesting no one had tried to force it from outside. This implied that if the site had been used, entry and exit were managed from inside or via a separate locking mechanism. When the technical team attempted to lift the door using levers, the hinges still functioned, though they creaked heavily in the cold air. Below the door was a deep dark space, with cold air rising from below. Flashlights shone down revealed a rusted metal staircase, descending straight about 3 meters before disappearing into darkness. The air from below carried the smell of rock dust, dampness, and stagnation, a typical sign of a sealed structure unused for a long time, but still structurally intact. The survey team tested the staircase's load-bearing capacity with equipment. Once confirmed it was not completely rotted, 2 members secured with safety ropes descended first to check the space below. At the bottom of the stairs, flashlight beams swept across walls, revealing a narrow tunnel, wide enough for only one person. The walls were rough concrete or poured stone from long ago, with rough surfaces, scratches in places, and patches of old paint. The tunnel extended about 5 meters before opening into a larger, nearly square space. There were no signs of collapse or water leakage, indicating the structure was solidly built from the mining era. What stopped the survey team was evidence that the space had been repaired or repurposed more recently than the structure's age. Walls showed patches of newer cement compared to the rest. The floor had repeated wear patterns along clear paths, and a corner had a wall recess resembling a former mount for equipment or shelving. No one touched anything, as this was only the space identification phase, not yet forensic examination. After fully scanning the structure, ground-penetrating radar was deployed again from inside, and revealed the bunker had another room behind, accessed through a narrow passage blocked by a heavy object or closed metal door. This confirmed the underground facility was not just an old tunnel, but a multi-room system capable of long-term human use. Once the entire area was documented and initial images sent back to command, the FBI made the official decision to seal off the entire surrounding area at Lost Horse Ridge. establishing security perimeters, posting warning signs, and preventing public access. The investigation team set up temporary tents near the hatch to protect the scene as needed. The bunker entrance was sealed with specialized caution tape, with personnel on 24/7 watch to ensure no unauthorized entry or disruption of the investigation. The discovery of the camouflaged hatch and confirmation of the deep underground bunker marked a major turning point in the search, as it revealed a real location potentially linked to Lena's 3 missing years, while raising larger questions about the purpose and who had recently used this facility. Immediately after the camouflaged bunker at Lost Horse Ridge was discovered and sealed, a specialized FBI and Nevada County Sheriff crime scene team was deployed inside the structure to collect evidence, document structural features, and determine if this was the site where Lena had been held during her entire 3-year disappearance. This phase was conducted with extreme caution, as any error in preserving the scene could destroy legally valuable traces. As the technical team reopened the hatch and descended the metal stairs, they used helmet-mounted lighting, high-resolution cameras, and 360 degrees cameras to record the entire space before touching any objects. The bunker was about 3.5 meters deep from the surface, with a narrow entrance leading to a small tunnel, and then opening into a large square room. Interior walls were rough concrete, with many shallow scratches, and some discoloration resembling old damp stains. The floor was worn cement, with small cracks from time and temperature changes. The low ceiling was supported by rusted but solid metal beams, reflecting a structure abandoned decades ago. In the center of the room was a crude wooden pallet bed made of pine, small in size, enough for an adult to lie with knees drawn up. The wood was worn at the edges with repeated friction marks, indicating frequent use. Forensic collection from the bed surface yielded fabric fibers, hair, and adhered dust, all carefully documented for DNA testing. Right next to the bed was a cut synthetic fiber rope, about 2 meters long, one end still looped around a metal bar fixed to the wall. Preliminary examination showed wear consistent with repeated tightening, and the technical team immediately seized it as key evidence, since Lena had restraint marks on her wrists that perfectly matched this rope's characteristics. Finding the restraint rope in the bunker strongly reinforced the likelihood that this place had been used for long-term confinement. In a corner, under thick dust, the crime scene team discovered a homemade device resembling a small camera mounted in a crude metal frame, with wiring running along the wall to a depleted separate battery pack. Upon lifting the camera, they noted it was not a standard commercial unit, but had been manually modified, altered casing, added fixed mount, and positioned to oversee the entire space. Most likely, the bunker operator had used the camera to monitor the victim without entering the room. The technical team analyzed dust on the device, bagged the camera as evidence, and searched nearby for storage media, but found no memory card or recording device on site. This suggested that if data existed, it had been removed or erased before abandonment. Continuing the sweep, the crime scene team found next to the bed a small craft paper-covered notebook, partially damp but still legible. Inside, pages contained scattered notes in uneven handwriting, using pencil and sometimes ballpoint pen, with short entries like "be quiet," "mealtime," "do not open door," "lie down," and numerical symbols in day-counting format. Some pages had irregular schedules, suggesting this could be the captor's activity coordination log or a behavior monitoring chart for the captive. These pages were seized and specially preserved for potential fingerprints or DNA from the writer. In another corner of the room, the crime scene team discovered a lower subfloor leading to a second smaller space. The entrance to the second space was blocked by a crude assembled wooden panel, likely placed to prevent the victim from seeing the rest of the bunker. Upon removing the panel, they found a narrower room, not tall enough to stand upright, with old metal hooks on the walls and a tattered blanket smelling of mold. In this room, forensics noted newer paint patches on the walls, apparently used to cover old scratches or writing. They scanned surfaces with UV light and detected long vertical streaks. Though not immediately identifiable, the technical team documented everything for later chemical analysis. Additionally, on the floor near a corner of the main room, forensics found a circular wear mark, possibly from repeated friction by an object over a long period, a detail consistent with involuntary behavior of a confined victim, such as pivoting feet or body in a very small area. Though preliminary, the circular floor wear indicated continuous use. Teams collected DNA samples from multiple locations: wall-mounted handles, the metal post near the bed, hatch edges, and areas around the camera. Samples were processed using standard methods to separate user DNA from that of survey team members. Any remaining fingerprints on metal or plastic surfaces were photographed, dusted, and recorded. Notably, the crime scene team found multiple hair and epithelial cell samples matching Lena's length and color, alongside a few others with different color and structure, indicating at least 2 individuals had been present. Furthermore, dust patterns on the wall near a small sliding door beside the main room showed the tray had been frequently opened and closed. Thick dust at the bottom edge, but thinned in the middle, confirmed long-term use, supporting the theory of a food delivery space. By the completion of the preliminary examination, there were no signs that evidence had been recently cleaned or tampered with, meaning the bunker may have been abandoned suddenly, but not too long ago, as many surfaces retained environmental characteristics closely matching samples from Lena. When the crime scene team compiled all scene data, the sealed bunker structure, wooden bed, restraint rope, homemade camera, food delivery door, notebook, floor wear marks, and DNA samples matching the victim, they reached a consistent conclusion: the bunker at Lost Horse Ridge was the location where Lena was held during her disappearance. This conclusion was based not on speculation, but on a chain of specific physical evidence tightly linked to her bodily injuries and the memory fragments she provided, marking the first clear identification of where she had been confined for 3 long years. Immediately after the forensic team completed collecting evidence inside the bunker, the FBI's profiler team was deployed to analyze all behavioral data in order to build the offender's profile, completely separate from forensics and crime scene processing. Profiling focused on how the bunker was used, how items were arranged, the pattern of victim control, and the level of familiarity the operator had with the confinement space over many years. These details allowed the construction of a psychological and technical portrait of the perpetrator, thereby narrowing down individuals in the area with the capability, knowledge, and opportunity to carry out the acts. Based on the profiler team's observations, the bunker at Lost Horse Ridge was not simply an abandoned structure repurposed, but had been intentionally modified to serve the purpose of isolating the victim. Retaining the old bunker structure while adding a sliding door mechanism for delivering food, installing homemade cameras in room corners, and reinforcing certain wall sections demonstrated that the perpetrator had manual repair skills, understood how to strengthen weak sections of the old structure, and was capable of operating basic electrical equipment, such as generators or internal lighting systems. This ruled out individuals without experience in industrial or mining spaces, while indicating long-term planning rather than impulsive behavior. A key feature of the bunker's structure was the clear division between the main room and a smaller auxiliary space, which the perpetrator apparently used for storage or to conceal repair activities. The main room was arranged minimally, with no sharp objects or items that could be used to damage the confinement environment, showing high awareness of risk control. Placing the pallet bed against the wall, near the camera's blind spot, reflected a remote observation pattern. The perpetrator wanted to monitor Lena, but limit direct contact. This is typical behavior of individuals with a tendency toward absolute control, while avoiding emotional confrontation. The fixed restraint system attached to the wall, along with the height and position of the attachment hooks, also indicated basic knowledge of anthropometrics. The ropes were positioned to restrain the victim in a sitting or lying position, while maximally limiting self-release capability. This showed that the perpetrator was not impulsive in restraint methods, but had experience, or had at least tested this pattern previously. The profiler team analyzed behavior through notes in a small notebook recovered from the bunker. Entries such as quiet, feeding time, no opening door and day-counting symbols indicated systematic thinking, rule-setting and self-monitoring of compliance. The use of single words, no explanations, and no lengthy writing reflected a cold, emotionally detached cognition focused on control function rather than recording experiences. Uneven handwriting, with strokes sometimes heavy and sometimes light, suggested the perpetrator might have periods of stress or internal loss of control, but always tried to maintain operational patterns. The bunker was operated by minimizing contact with the victim, appearing only through footsteps or a low voice, consistent with Lena's description. This reinforced the assessment that the perpetrator was the avoidant communication type or had extremely introverted psychological traits, possibly even high-level obsessive-compulsive disorder. When cross-referencing this behavior with resident data around the Sierra Nevada area, the FBI filtered individuals living near abandoned mines, especially those with prior mining experience, repair workers, people living alone in forested mountain areas, and those who had access to or owned old mining maps. They screened records of residents within a 40-mile radius of Lost Horse Ridge, prioritizing those with a history of reclusive living, work related to construction, mining, forestry, or electrical equipment. From an initial list of over 200 names, the FBI narrowed it down to 36 individuals based on criteria: familiarity with terrain, means of access to deep forest areas, ability to dig or repair bunkers, isolated living, and absence from the community during the time Lena disappeared. After overlapping criteria analysis, the profiler team began to notice one name standing out far more than others: Elliot Crane. Elliot lived about 18 miles from Lost Horse Ridge, a roughly 48-year-old single man who had worked as a mining equipment maintenance technician since the 1990s and spent long periods at decommissioned mines. Elliot's professional record showed extensive mechanical repair experience, deep knowledge of mine structures, generator operation, and years of isolated living in northern Mono County's forested areas. Notably, Elliot had been noted in a civil report 3 years earlier for unusual nighttime noise near Carpenter Ridge. Although it did not lead to a criminal investigation, the report matched a hunter's account of generator sounds coming from deep in the forest. Additionally, Elliot had no clear alibi during the period Lena disappeared, and traffic camera movement data did not record his vehicle in residential areas for many consecutive weeks during the presumed first year of Lena's disappearance. From a behavioral perspective, Elliot matched almost perfectly the offender model built from the scene: accustomed to small, enclosed spaces, habitual strict rule maintenance, preference for environmental control, limited social interaction, and manual technical manipulation skills. His prior mental health records showed no official diagnoses, but old employment files indicated reprimands for unstable behavior and a tendency to avoid colleagues. When the FBI compiled all factors, skills, living environment, behavioral patterns, matches with both forensics and bunker traces, Elliot Crane became the most prominent suspect on the shortlist, opening a key investigative direction requiring verification with concrete evidence. Immediately after the profiling report identified Elliot Crane as the most prominent suspect, the FBI shifted to the phase of strengthening legal evidence to determine whether he was directly linked to the bunker and Lena's confinement. The first step was processing all DNA samples collected from the bunker, particularly those on the restraints, pallet bed, metal handles, and homemade camera equipment. The lab prioritized separating Lena's DNA from other samples to ensure any foreign DNA sequences were treated as independent evidence. When lab results came back, a critical report was sent directly to the investigative team. On the wall-fixed restraint section, besides Lena's DNA, there was male DNA matching one with Elliot Crane's profile stored in California's database from a prior civil arrest related to a property dispute. The match rate was absolute, completely ruling out error. This marked the first hard evidence linking Crane to the confinement site. Next, forensics examined footwear to determine if wear patterns in the bunker matched shoes Crane might own. On the main room's concrete floor were shoe prints with a distinct geometric pattern, slightly square toe, X-shaped tread offset, and a characteristic indentation from asymmetrical wear. Based on this sole pattern, the FBI checked purchase records and discovered Crane had bought a pair of Timberfell brand hiking boots, Model T240, at an outdoor gear store on the outskirts of Reno in the month Lena disappeared. The sole pattern of that model matched 95% with the bunker prints. The investigative team performed manual overlay comparison, and the results were nearly identical. Although shoe prints are not DNA evidence, in the context of multiple reinforcing proofs, it became a key detail proving Crane's physical presence in the bunker. Additionally, forensics found microscopic soil particles trapped in the treadwear grooves of the prints left on the floor. When compared to soil samples from Crane's old shoes, the results showed nearly identical mineral composition, including hematite, magnetite, and iron oxide dust in a highly specific ratio only found in the mine cluster near Lost Horse Ridge. This was geological evidence directly tying Crane to the bunker environment. Furthermore, the investigative team exploited traffic camera data along the Donner Pass area around the time Lena disappeared. Although not all cameras functioned well in that year's snow conditions, footage from a Caltrans camera on Highway 89 captured an old gray-silver Ford F-150 pickup traveling toward Coldstream Canyon in the late afternoon on the day Lena vanished. The truck bed shape, reflective sticker on the right corner, and left side light position matched 100% with the vehicle Crane owned at the time, verified through vehicle registration records. According to license plate data, the camera did not capture all characters due to snow obstruction, but the first 3 characters matched Crane's plate exactly. His vehicle appearing near Lena's disappearance location at the exact time was too significant a coincidence to ignore. To reinforce this, the FBI re-examined positioning data from a gas station near Truckee, where security cameras recorded a man wearing a baseball cap with a build similar to Crane, purchasing fuel on the day of the disappearance. Although the image was not clear enough for facial identification, body structure and gait matched Crane's profile. The transaction timing at the gas station aligned with the F-150's appearance on Highway 89, forming a seamless movement chain leading to the Donner Pass area. After analyzing all data, the FBI uncovered a pivotal detail related to the homemade camera in the bunker. Although the device no longer had its memory card, forensics extracted a faint fingerprint on the metal frame. Using magnetic powder lifting, they reconstructed about 60% of the ridge pattern, enough for comparison with Crane's data. Result: fingerprint match. This was crucial legal evidence, as it not only proved Crane touched the homemade camera, but also showed direct involvement in installing or adjusting the device, reinforcing his role in operating the bunker. Additionally, in the notebook recovered from the bunker, forensics found 2 faint fingerprints on page corners. Comparison with Crane's records confirmed high-level match. Handwritten paper evidence is not absolute DNA proof, but with matching fingerprints, it became strong evidence. The chain of legal evidence grew when the FBI cross-checked Crane's workplace absences. Time records from the regional maintenance company showed multiple consecutive weeks of no-shows just days after Lena disappeared. When questioned, the company stated Crane often went incommunicado for days, but had never vanished for such extended periods before, making his behavior during that time particularly suspicious. When all DNA samples, fingerprints, shoe prints, traffic camera movement data, and evidence of presence near Donner Pass were pieced together, the investigation concluded that every lead pointed to the same person, Elliot Crane. This was no longer a hypothesis, but a conclusion based on hard evidence, carrying sufficient legal weight to designate Crane as the primary suspect in Lena Marlowe's 3-year confinement. Once the entire chain of legal evidence converged on Elliot Crane, the FBI and Nevada County Sheriff officially moved the case to the operational phase, planning the arrest to ensure the suspect had no opportunity to flee, destroy evidence, or endanger others. Crane had lived in isolation for years, was capable of using mechanical tools, and knew the forested mountain terrain well, so investigators did not underestimate the risk of resistance or escape into abandoned mine areas. A covert surveillance team was deployed before obtaining the arrest warrant, focusing on confirming Crane's current location and daily routines to select the optimal intervention timing. Over 3 days of continuous monitoring, the FBI confirmed Crane spent most of his time at an old garage about a mile from his home, formerly used for mining equipment repair, but now deteriorated. Covert drone-mounted cameras showed he frequently visited the garage in late afternoons, stayed for hours, and left only after dark. The garage had an old roll-up door, 2 rear exits, and was situated in sparse forest, making it both ideal for arrest due to easy encirclement and potentially risky if Crane had tools or weapons. After the arrest warrant was approved by a federal judge, the FBI formed a task force of 8 SWAT members combined with 3 sheriff officers, deploying early morning before Crane arrived at the garage. They set up ambush points within a 200-meter radius, using natural terrain for cover and sealing all exits in a triangular formation. When the clock neared 5 p.m., Crane's gray-silver F-150 appeared on the dirt road leading to the garage, right on his usual schedule. Surveillance reported the signal, and the assault team prepared. The vehicle stopped. Crane stepped out with his familiar gait, carrying a heavy tool bag. He opened the garage door, entered, turned on the light, and began rummaging through cabinets. This was the moment the arrest team awaited, the suspect inside an enclosed space with limited visibility and no immediate escape. The team commander ordered approach, and 2 groups advanced from opposite directions, one straight to the roll-up door, the other blocking rear exits. As the front team neared the door, they used a megaphone. "Elliot Crane, this is the FBI, drop your tools and come out immediately." In the first few seconds, there was no response from inside, but helmet-mounted cameras showed Crane startled, turning toward the door and stepping toward a workbench full of mechanical tools. As soon as he appeared to reach for a metal object, risk assessment escalated. The commander immediately ordered breach. A SWAT member used a hydraulic tool to snap the roll-up door lock, forcing it open. The team rushed in, using ballistic shields and high-powered flashlights to blind the suspect. Crane reacted instinctively, raising hands to shield his eyes and backing into a garage corner, but showed no active aggression. 2 SWAT members tackled and pinned him to the floor, cuffing his hands behind his back in under 15 seconds from breach. He resisted weakly, but not enough to complicate matters. Immediately after being cuffed, Crane began muttering incoherent phrases in a low, trembling voice, but did not ask why he was being arrested or protest. This demeanor was noted as it matched neighbors' descriptions of his periods of absolute silence or talking to himself. Once the garage was secured, the FBI proceeded with initial evidence seizure per arrest protocol. First, they searched Crane's person, recovering house keys, garage keys, a small folding knife, an old flip phone, and a wallet with ID. No firearms, but the tool bag he carried contained potentially lethal items and was separated as evidence. Then, the team conducted a preliminary garage search, locating items for forensic comparison. Timberfell T240 boots with sole wear matching bunker prints, a coil of rope identical to bunker restraints, a container of generator batteries, a memory card labeled CAM B1 in pencil, and 2 small notebooks with handwriting similar to the bunker notebook. All items were sealed on-site, logged, and transferred to the lab. Meanwhile, Crane was escorted to the tactical vehicle, head slightly bowed, offering no resistance and asking no questions about the arrest reason. As support moved him out of the garage, a few scattered local residents began noticing, but the FBI maintained the perimeter to prevent unverified information spread. Investigators noted the arrest proceeded safely, efficiently, and without injuries on either side. With Elliot Crane in custody, along with significant evidence seized at the scene, the FBI and Nevada County Sheriff officially entered the next phase of the case. Cross-examining statements, analyzing seized data, and preparing charges based on the solid evidence chain built over months of investigation. Immediately after Elliot Crane was brought to the FBI Interrogation Center in Reno, The investigation team entered the initial statement exploitation phase, not aimed at seeking an immediate confession, but at determining the suspect's communication patterns, level of alertness, ability to lie, and knowledge of the areas related to the case. In the first interrogation session, Crane appeared quiet, with unfocused eyes and a hunched posture, but showed no signs of losing control. When asked about his whereabouts in the 72 hours before his arrest, Crane responded in an even tone, stating that every day is the same, and he just fixes things and lives alone. When asked if he knew the Lost Horse Ridge area, he said he had heard the name a long time ago, but never set foot there. The interrogation team immediately noted this response because it directly contradicted the camera data, shoe prints, and DNA recovered from the bunker. Crane maintained a passive demeanor, avoided eye contact, and repeatedly fidgeted with the edge of his pants, a calming gesture indicating stress but not necessarily cooperation. The investigators began asking more specific questions, particularly regarding his movements on the day Lena disappeared. When asked why his F-150 was seen on Highway 89 that afternoon, Crane said he was checking out some wood because he heard someone was selling old materials near Donner Pass. However, when asked to name the seller or provide a specific location, Crane could not give any consistent answer. He changed his story at least 3 times, at one point saying he met a man wearing a brown jacket, at another saying he just drove around to clear his head. This constant shifting became the second contradiction in the record. When the interrogation team confronted him with gas station camera footage near Truckee, showing a figure resembling Crane on the day Lena vanished, he replied, "It could be me, but I don't remember," creating ambiguity that suggested he was trying to maintain the lowest possible level of denial. The investigators did not rush to refute him, but shifted to the topic of mechanical devices, specifically the homemade camera recovered from the bunker. They asked Crane if he had ever installed security cameras or repaired similar equipment. He replied that he had fixed a few random things, but insisted he knew nothing about the bunker and didn't install cameras there. Immediately, the investigators presented images of matching fingerprints found on the camera frame. Upon seeing the images, Crane lowered his head and remained silent for nearly a minute before responding, "I don't know where that is." This was the third contradiction. He could not explain why his fingerprints were on evidence located in a structure buried deep under the mountain. Next, the interrogation team moved to the restraints containing DNA matching Crane's. When informed of the DNA results, he denied it by saying, "I've bought many different types of rope," but could not explain why his DNA was on restraints bolted to the wall inside the bunker. When pressed for an explanation, Crane only repeated, "I don't know," indicating his defenses had reached a point of helplessness. The investigators continued by comparing the notebook recovered from the bunker to Crane's handwriting. They showed him enlarged pages, then presented 2 notebooks seized from his garage with similar handwriting. Crane immediately appeared flustered and said, "Someone could have put them in the garage," but this was unconvincing because consistent handwriting was found in both locations, and Crane's distinctive style, heavy downstrokes and slightly slanted horizontals, matched the bunker samples. Another contradiction emerged when investigators asked Crane where he was during the period Lena went missing. He insisted he was at home the whole time, but maintenance company records showed he was absent for several consecutive days. When questioned about those absences, Crane only gave vague answers like, "I don't remember," "I like being alone," or "I don't have to report to anyone," none of which were sufficient to establish an alibi. The interrogation team then presented the forensic map, showing soil matches between the treads of Crane's shoes and soil inside the bunker. When asked if he had ever entered any abandoned mines, Crane denied it, "I don't like dark tunnels." However, the geological evidence completely refuted this statement. The investigators shifted to a strategy of connecting the evidence to force Crane to confront an undeniable chain of events. They listed Crane's truck appearing near where Lena disappeared, shoe prints matching the pair he purchased, his DNA on the restraints, his fingerprints on the camera, notes in handwriting matching his matching soil samples, and evidence of his absence during the week Lena vanished. As each piece of evidence was presented, Crane gradually shifted from denial to prolonged silence. Finally, when the investigator asked directly, "Did you take Lena Marlowe to Lost Horse Ridge?" Crane did not answer directly, but said, "I didn't do anything bad. I just wanted to be left alone." The interrogation team noted this statement because it did not refute the accusation while containing a vague justification, a common response when a suspect knows the chain of evidence has exceeded their ability to deny it. After many hours of interrogation, the FBI compiled all the contradictions, cross-referencing the statement with physical evidence and behavior. The final report noted that Elliot Crane's statement was inconsistent, contained multiple denials that contradicted hard evidence, and failed to provide an alibi for any critical time frame. Based on DNA, fingerprints, shoe prints, camera data, and his physical presence in the bunker, the investigation team concluded there was sufficient legal basis to prosecute Crane for the kidnapping and prolonged detention of Lena Marlowe, and forwarded the file to the federal prosecutor's office to prepare the next steps in the trial process. When Elliot Crane was federally indicted on charges of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, serious bodily harm, and operating an illegal detention facility, the trial at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of California quickly became a focal point due to the severity and unique nature of the case. The federal prosecutor opened the trial by presenting a detailed summary of the entire investigation process, emphasizing that the case was not based on speculation, but on a tightly linked chain of forensic evidence that was inseparable and led to only one reasonable conclusion: Elliot Crane was the person who kidnapped, detained, and isolated Lena Marlowe in an underground bunker at Lost Horse Ridge for 3 years. The prosecution displayed environmental forensic maps, photos of the bunker, restraints, homemade camera, pallet bed, journal, shoe prints, and items seized from Crane's garage to prove absolute similarity between the two spaces, scientific evidence that the defense had no basis to refute. Each piece of evidence was presented in chronological order: Crane's DNA on the restraints, his fingerprints on the homemade camera, shoe prints matching the pair he bought, notebooks with handwriting consistent with notes recovered from the bunker, and images of his F-150 on Highway 89. Near the time Lena disappeared, the prosecutor stressed that no innocent explanation could account for Crane's DNA, fingerprints, and soil samples all appearing in a bunker he steadfastly denied ever entering. To bolster the argument, the prosecution called the environmental forensic team as expert witnesses. The soil analyst explained the mineral composition match as unique to the abandoned iron mine at Lost Horse Ridge, completely dismissing claims that the soil could have been contaminated or appeared randomly. The pollen expert presented samples found on Lena and compared them to the specific geographic area. An ecological fingerprint showing the victim had lived at 2,200–2,600 meters elevation in the Sierra Nevada. The prosecution continued by calling a mechanical engineer to analyze the homemade camera, proving the device was hand-assembled with electrical mechanical knowledge consistent with Crane's former profession. Additionally, the digital forensics team displayed data from the Truckee gas station combined with Caltrans video. The footage of the F-150 on the road to Coldstream Canyon was described in detail, along with proof that 3 license plate characters matched Crane's vehicle. The prosecutor concluded the presentation with a chain of reasoning. For Crane to be innocent, he would have to prove that someone else shared his DNA, bought the same shoes, owned the same truck, had the same habit of building homemade cameras, appeared at Donner Pass the same day Lena vanished, and simultaneously used restraints containing his own DNA, an implausible scenario that could not exist. When it was the defense's turn, Crane's attorney avoided directly challenging the DNA or fingerprint evidence and instead argued that there is no proof Lena was detained against her will. They claimed no torture instruments were found, no evidence of direct violent injury on Lena's body, and that it was possible she was in the bunker by agreement or voluntarily due to some psychological factor. This defense strategy aimed to attack the legal core of the kidnapping charge, the element of coercion. The defense attorney argued that Lena's psychological state prevented her from recalling the true circumstances, so it could not be certain that Crane brought her into the bunker. They emphasized that Crane's statements did not admit guilt, and that everyone has the right to live in isolation if they choose, implying the bunker might have been merely a place where Crane repaired old items or sought personal shelter. They suggested the notebook entries might be unrelated to the victim and were simply personal to-do lists. However, this strategy quickly collapsed when the prosecution called the medical doctors and psychologists from Northern Inyo Hospital to testify. The medical doctor detailed malnutrition, old restraint marks, reduced bone density, prolonged limited movement, and severe vitamin D deficiency, all characteristic signs of a victim detained long-term in a confined space, not someone living freely. They stated Lena could not have sustained herself in the bunker, let alone voluntarily restricted her movement to the degree that caused the observed injuries. The psychologist described dissociative memory loss, fear responses, avoidance behaviors typical of captivity victims, and panic reactions whenever hearing words like night, outside, or door, signs that could not be faked or self-induced in normal living conditions. When cross-examined by the defense, both experts affirmed with high certainty that Lena had been subjected to prolonged environmental control. To further strengthen the case, the prosecution called local hunters and residents near Lost Horse Ridge as witnesses. One hunter recounted hearing a small generator running in the forest over the past 2 years, a detail that perfectly matched Lena's fragmented memories. Another resident confirmed seeing faint yellow light from a location near the bunker on several winter nights, despite no cabins being in use in that area. These testimonies destroyed the defense's unoccupied bunker argument. In the final rebuttal, the prosecution delivered the decisive blow. Crane's DNA was not only on the restraints, but also on the camera frame and in the notebook. 3 different locations within the bunker. The prosecutor closed by posing a question to the jury. There is no way, no reasonable scenario that explains why Elliot Crane's DNA, fingerprints, shoe prints, homemade devices, personal items, and physical presence all appeared in Lena Marlowe's prolonged detention site, except that he was the one operating that space. After 6 days of arguments, 42 pieces of evidence presented, 18 witnesses testifying, and 3 forensic experts clarifying every connection, the case was handed to the jury for deliberation. The deliberation lasted nearly 9 hours, during which the jury reviewed the full DNA chain, shoe prints, Coltrane's video, and medical testimony. Internal reports indicated the jury found no evidence supporting the defense's voluntary argument, and every factor pointed in the same conclusive direction. Finally, on the afternoon of the 7th day of the trial, the jury sent word to the judge that they had reached a unanimous decision. When called back into the courtroom, the 4-person stood and read the verdict: guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing for Elliot Crane at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of California took place on a quiet autumn morning, but the atmosphere inside the courtroom was heavy as everyone sensed the legal turning point about to be set. Following the jury's guilty on all counts verdict, Federal Judge Miriam Lockridge proceeded with the sentencing phase in proper order, beginning by reading the full list of charges Crane had been convicted of. The charges were listed slowly, one by one, like final nails sealing an unremovable legal structure: kidnapping under 18 U.S.C. Section 1201, prolonged unlawful imprisonment, serious bodily harm, including malnutrition and mobility impairment, operating an illegal detention facility, intentional concealment of the victim's location, and obstruction of a federal investigation. Each charge carried severe penalties, but when combined under federal law for a kidnapping lasting more than 30 days with serious bodily harm, the minimum sentence far exceeded a term of years. The prosecutor presented final arguments before the judge pronounced sentence. They emphasized that this was one of the rare prolonged detention cases rescued in the U.S. justice system, and that Lena Marlowe's survival did not diminish the cruelty of the acts. The prosecutor reiterated, the defendant's actions not only deprived the victim of her freedom for 3 years, but destroyed her body and mind in a way medical science describes as a captive trauma pattern, a deliberate, prolonged pattern of harm. Under federal law, such conduct is judged not only by outcome, but by the degree of control and calculation of the perpetrator. Additionally, the prosecutor noted that Crane showed no remorse, did not cooperate with the investigation, and provided no information helpful to understanding the crime. His denial to the end, despite facing an undeniable chain of DNA, fingerprint, and shoeprint evidence, was described by the prosecutor as a clear indicator of recidivism risk, if not permanently isolated from society. When it was the defense attorney's turn, they attempted to argue that Crane had undiagnosed psychological issues, that he may not have fully understood his actions, and that a life sentence would deprive him of any chance for medical treatment. However, Judge Lockridge interrupted and required the defense to provide verified medical evidence, a request the defense could not meet, as no data showed Crane suffered from a severe mental illness negating criminal responsibility. When it came to the victim impact statement, Lena did not stand herself. Her mother read the statement on her daughter's behalf, following federal guidelines. She described the exhausting 3-year search, living on the edge of hope and despair, and finally the shock of seeing her daughter return in an unrecognizable state of collapse. Her voice trembled, but remained resolute as she said, "My daughter lived 3 years in darkness. Even a lifetime won't give back the years that were stolen. But we believe in the law, and we believe society needs protection from the person who created that darkness." After the victim family's statement, Judge Lockridge entered the sentencing phase. She emphasized that federal law requires punishment proportionate to the severity of the conduct, especially in kidnappings involving prolonged detention. She listed each aggravating factor: the defendant's absolute control over the victim, the continuous 3-year duration, the construction and operation of the bunker as a secret detention facility, evidence of restricting light, nutrition, and movement to the point of causing bodily degeneration, the defendant's deliberate concealment of the victim's whereabouts by erasing camera memory cards and abandoning the bunker for days, and finally, the defendant's lack of cooperation and remorse throughout the trial. Then, she announced the formal sentence: Elliot Crane is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 1201, the defendant will be confined in a high-security federal facility and will have no opportunity for sentence reduction, pardon, or release in any form. Some people in the courtroom cried upon hearing the sentence, not out of pity for the defendant, but from the sense that justice had finally closed the 3-year nightmare Lena endured. Crane showed no reaction, only staring at the floor. His face displayed no anger, no confusion, no denial, just the same prolonged emptiness seen throughout prior interrogations. When federal marshals instructed him to stand for the final portion of the ruling, he complied without a word. After the sentence was fully read, the judge ordered the defendant immediately transferred to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. 2 marshals cuffed Crane's hands and escorted him out of the courtroom through the secure prisoner exit, avoiding public contact. From that moment, Elliot Crane officially became a federal prisoner, serving life without parole, a sentence ensuring he would never have the opportunity to leave the prison system. The prosecutor told the media after the hearing that this sentence not only punished Crane's actions, but sent a strong message: any prolonged kidnapping and detention on U.S. soil would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. Lena's family left the courthouse in silence, without celebration, only holding each other's hands tightly. One legal door had closed, but they knew full well that Lena's recovery journey still lay ahead. After Elliot Crane was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole and transferred to the federal prison system, the attention of the press and the public gradually shifted away from the courtroom to a more important question. What would Lena Marlowe do with the rest of her life after 3 years held captive in darkness? The path ahead of her was not simply one of being rescued, it was a long journey of relearning how to live in a world she once knew, but that had become unfamiliar. Immediately after the trial, the family decided to take Lena back to Oregon, avoiding excessive media attention. In the first few months, Lena continued therapy at a rehabilitation center specializing in victims of prolonged captivity. Doctors described her progress as slow but steady, with small but significant improvements. She could sleep more than 3 hours a night, had fewer nightmares, and began communicating in short sentences instead of just nodding or shaking her head as before. The memories of her 3 missing years did not return in a coherent way. They appeared as unsorted fragments, or sometimes just sensations: a cold dust on her hands, the steady hum of machinery, dim yellow light that made her squint. Her therapist helped her understand that memories did not need to return fully for her to recover. What mattered more was learning to live with what she still retained and rebuilding a sense of safety in the present. However, reintegration was not just a medical process, but also a social challenge. Lena struggled with things that seemed ordinary. A door slamming shut made her flinch and back into a corner. Darkness in a long hallway unsettled her. Even direct sunlight dazzled her eyes and forced her to retreat indoors. The long period without natural light had made her body overreact to brightness, and doctors had to guide her through gradual re-exposure. In social interactions, Lena was unaccustomed to having many people close by. At the supermarket, she constantly looked around to ensure no one was behind her. Family members had to adjust their daily habits to avoid unintentionally triggering her fear. The Marlowe family also went through a complex emotional whirlwind. They were overjoyed that their daughter was alive, but the pain and guilt over the 3 lost years weighed heavily. The mother struggled with insomnia for months, constantly wondering what her daughter had endured. The father left his construction supervision job to devote time to caring for Lena. Her brother tried to keep the family atmosphere as natural as possible, avoiding making Lena feel pitied. The family also followed the psychologist's guidance: no pressing questions, no forcing her to remember, no recounting trial details she did not want to hear. One of the biggest challenges was learning to communicate with Lena again without relying on memories she no longer had. The entire family had to rebuild their relationships from scratch, as if meeting someone both familiar and strange. Alongside Lena's personal progress, the case left a profound impact on the Sierra Nevada community. Residents in Truckee, Bishop, Mono County, and areas near Lost Horse Ridge were shocked to learn that a human confinement bunker had existed undetected in the forest for years. Hunters and hikers became more vigilant about unusual sounds in the woods, and the Forest Service implemented new inspection procedures for abandoned mines. Some old handmade cabins were demolished due to the risk of becoming unauthorized shelters. Numerous volunteer groups were formed to patrol deep forest areas each summer. The University of Oregon, where Lena had studied, established a fund to support missing persons victims and created an outdoor safety education program for students. The Marlowe family participated quietly, avoiding media appearances but providing materials and experiences for specialized workshops. Legally, the case set an important precedent for long-term missing persons investigations. The combination of environmental forensics, psychological forensics, and behavioral analysis became part of FBI investigative training courses. Even national procedures for screening abandoned mines were updated after the clear shortcomings in managing old structures became evident. But the greatest impact was not in law or investigation, but in how communities viewed missing persons cases. Previously, most people believed that someone disappearing in the wilderness was usually due to accident, weather, or getting lost. After the Lena Marlowe case, many families understood that abduction and confinement in isolated environments was entirely possible, though rare. For Lena, the journey ahead remained long. 3 years of captivity could not be erased from her body and mind with just a few months of therapy. But she began showing signs of recovery. She ventured outside in the mornings, sat on the porch when it was quiet, spoke more, and sometimes smiled when hearing an old song she used to like. The family saw those moments as small but immensely important victories. Lena was not yet able to return to school or live independently. She still needed support from family, therapists, and recovery groups. But she no longer stared at the ceiling when trying to sleep, no longer grew anxious at the sound of running machinery, and occasionally, looking out the window, she would say things like, "Today is brighter than yesterday." For someone who had lived 3 years in underground darkness, that statement was the greatest testament to a resilience that no trial or sentence could measure. The Lena Marlowe case ultimately closed legally, but her and her family's healing journey continued, day by day in the true light of the world she had just returned to. The story of Lena Marlowe, a college student who vanished in the Sierra Nevada and was found 3 years later in severe distress, is not only a rare criminal case but also reflects very real issues in contemporary American society. The hidden dangers of wilderness areas, the lack of caution when traveling alone, gaps in managing abandoned structures, and especially the challenges for survivors of prolonged captivity. In the story, Lena only intended to conduct plant surveying for an afternoon, an activity very common among students and nature enthusiasts. But the vast, sparsely monitored environment and unsealed abandoned mines created conditions for a perpetrator like Elliot Crane to act undetected. This reflects the reality that in many western U.S. states, especially California, Nevada, and Colorado, hundreds of old tunnel systems and self-built cabins still exist without adequate warnings. From this, the important lesson is that people, especially students, climbers, and hikers, should develop habits like sharing itineraries, traveling in groups, using location-sharing apps, and avoiding overly remote routes. Beyond physical safety, Lena's story raises a major issue: mental health after trauma. Lena not only suffered dissociative memory loss, but also feared light, feared slamming doors, and had avoidance reflexes, symptoms commonly seen in U.S. victims of captive trauma. This reminds us that support for victims does not end with rescue or the perpetrator's arrest. Long-term therapy is the key to helping them reintegrate into life. The lesson for the community is to be patient, not pressure victims to remember or get better quickly, and to respect their recovery pace. Finally, the story also serves as a reminder that justice in the United States, as in the life without parole sentence for Elliot Crane, not only punishes but also protects society from long-term threats. But to prevent such incidents, the most important thing remains raising community awareness, especially for those living, working, or traveling in the vast wilderness areas for which the United States is famous. Thank you for following the haunting story of Lena Marlowe's journey back. If you want to continue exploring thrilling cases and real-life lessons like this, remember to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video, where we will continue to look directly at the dark corners of life, to understand, to stay vigilant, and to better protect ourselves.